I've been working at one of the biggest cheese factories for 5 years now. This place never really sleeps. It runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all year long. I work the night shift in the parts department, and most nights are pretty slow. We also have this huge warehouse sitting about 100 feet away from the cheese plant. That's where we keep the bigger stuff: motors, pumps, cylinders, and all kinds of heavy equipment. Most of the time, the warehouse doors stay unlocked because barely anyone ever goes in there except us parts guys. The place has these LED motion lights all over the ceiling, about 35 of them in total. They turn on whenever they sense movement, and after 10 minutes of no motion, they shut off automatically. One night, it was cold, rainy, and quiet. Around 1 a.m., I had to head over to the warehouse to grab a motor off a rack with the forklift. I opened the garage door and drove inside. That's when I noticed something strange. In the back corner of the warehouse, one of the motion lights was already on. That corner was at least 50 feet away from me. And what made it even weirder was that none of the other lights were on. Just that one light in the back. I remember thinking it was odd, but I didn't let it bother me too much. I got to work and started pulling the motor off the rack. After I set the motor down on the pallet, I heard footsteps. They were coming from that same back corner, right where the light was on. I stopped for a second and listened. My first thought was that maybe one of the other guys had come in, but there was no reason for anyone else to be in there. I called out, asking if anyone was back there. No answer. Nothing. At that point, I figured maybe I was just hearing things. So I loaded the motor onto the forklift, took it to the maintenance crew, and talked with them for about half an hour. I even stepped outside for a cigarette before heading back. Around 2 a.m., I returned to the warehouse to close the garage door I had left open. As I walked up to it, I glanced toward the back corner again. The LED light was off now. I shut the garage door and started walking back toward the main exit. But before I could leave, I heard footsteps again. Then, right in front of me, the back corner light switched on. One light became 2, then 3. Then a whole row of lights started coming on one by one, almost like something was walking straight toward me. And then I saw him. A man dressed completely in black stepped out of the darkness. His face was covered in tattoos, and when he looked at me, it was with this cold, twisted expression that made my skin crawl. I managed to say, "Who are you?" He didn't answer. I'm 6'2", so in my head, I was already thinking that if the guy rushed me, I could probably handle him. Still, something about the way he stood there made me uneasy. I told him he had no business being there, but he just kept staring at me with that same sinister look. So I grabbed the radio and called security. I told them we had an unauthorized person in the warehouse and needed backup immediately. The second the man heard me say that, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. I backed up instantly, my eyes locked on the blade. He didn't move. He just stood there, holding the knife like he was waiting for something. And then, from outside, we heard security approaching. As soon as he heard them, the man turned and ran toward the back door. I stayed frozen for a moment. Then security rushed inside and asked where he went. I told them he had escaped through the back door. They searched the warehouse just to be safe, but they couldn't find him anywhere. When morning came at 6 a.m., I told my supervisor everything. He said he would check the security footage to see where the guy had come from and where he ran off to. The only thing the cameras showed was the man climbing over our barbed wire fence and entering the warehouse. Since that night, my supervisor has made sure the warehouse doors stay locked at all times. And honestly, I still think about what might have happened if I hadn't called security when I did. Every night after dinner, I used to take my dog for a walk around my neighborhood. Nothing ever really happened on those walks. I'd just circle the block and come back home. That was my routine. For context, I'm a woman in my late 20s, and I live in a middle-class neighborhood. The town has a reputation for being very safe, with a low crime rate. I'd lived there for 15 years and had never once felt like I was in danger. That is, until one winter night. It was just after 7 p.m. when I got home, ate a quick frozen dinner, and got my dog ready for our walk. Since it was winter, the sun had already gone down. It was dark outside, but the town keeps the streets and sidewalks fairly well lit, so I never worried too much. As I walked, I turned the corner that leads to a path running beside a park. It was the SA. Same route I usually took. A nice little loop that brought me back home in about 15 minutes. The night was quiet, which wasn't unusual for winter. I stood on the snowy sidewalk while my dog sniffed around a tree, and that's when I noticed a car parked up ahead on the side of the road, right beside the path. Its headlights were off, but the light inside the car was on. I could see someone moving around in the front seat. At first, I tried not to stare. I didn't want to make it obvious that I'd noticed them. I was curious, but not exactly scared. The car was parked in a strange spot, nowhere near any houses, and it was late and cold, so I couldn't figure out what they were doing there. I tugged on my dog's leash and kept walking. As I got closer, I realized it was a man. He looked like he was searching frantically through the glove box, almost as if he had dropped something important and couldn't find it. I was still trying to avoid making eye contact, but then he suddenly looked up and saw me. My first instinct was to look away, but then I glanced back. I was only 10 or 15 feet from his car at that point. He raised a hand in a friendly gesture and rolled his window down. "Excuse me," he called out. "Would you mind helping me with something?" He looked around my age, maybe just a normal guy. I asked what he needed, and he started explaining that something was wrong with his car and it wouldn't move. He used a bunch of car terms I didn't even understand. Honestly, I wasn't going to be any help to him. I apologized and told him I really couldn't assist with that. Then I pulled my dog forward and started walking again. A few steps later, I heard the window roll back up. Then the car started. A few seconds after that, it drove away. I turned around and watched him go, and that's when my stomach dropped. The way he drove off made it seem like nothing had been wrong at all. He had just asked for help moments ago, saying his car wouldn't work, and now he was driving away perfectly fine. After that, I started walking faster. I was still about 10 minutes from home, and my mind was racing. Something about the whole thing felt deeply wrong. I kept moving along the path until I reached the section that goes behind a few houses before opening into the backside of the neighborhood. That stretch is always darker and more isolated. I quickened my pace, wanting to get through it as fast as possible. But when I reached the end of the path and looked out onto the neighborhood street, I saw that same car again. I could only see the front end of it, but I recognized it right away. It looked like he had parked there on purpose, trying not to be seen. I turned immediately, pulled my dog with me, and started jogging in the opposite direction. Once we got back near the park, I cut down another street and took a much longer route home, staying close to other houses the whole time. Thankfully, it seemed like he lost track of me. By the time I got home, my heart was pounding. I called the police to report the man, but then I realized something awful. I hadn't gotten the license plate. Even worse, a few nights later, I saw that same car again, parked near the path I usually walked. This time, all the lights were off. I called the police, and when they arrived and checked it out, nobody was inside. They ran the plate, and that's when they discovered the car had actually been stolen. Knowing that made me feel sick. I had spent my whole life feeling safe in that neighborhood, and still, I had come dangerously close to something terrible happening. I still think about what that man was frantically searching for in his glove box. I don't know what he wanted, and honestly, I never want to know. This happened last year. I was at home taking a shower before bed. It was later than I usually stayed up, but I had a lot of work to do, and I didn't have to work the next day. I was standing under the water, trying to relax after a long day, when I heard a faint click. It was very soft, but it sounded like it came from inside the house. At first, I didn't think much of it. Houses make strange noises all the time, so I just kept showering. Then I heard it again. This time, it sounded like it was right outside the bathroom door. I rinsed off quickly, turned off the shower, and got dressed while trying to figure out what the sound could have been. When I opened the bathroom door, I immediately noticed the hallway light was off. I knew I had left it on. For a second, I thought maybe the power had gone out. But then I looked at the light switch on the wall. It was turned off. I glanced both ways down the hallway, already feeling uneasy, and flipped the switch back on. The light came on normally. Then I walked toward the stairs and saw that downstairs was completely dark too. One light switching off by itself is strange enough. But two? That told me it wasn't just a coincidence. Something was going on. I stood at the top of the stairs for a while, trying to decide what to do. I had no idea what was happening, but the thought that someone might have broken into my house just to turn off my lights felt disturbing in a way I can't really explain. The longer I stood there, the more anxious I became. Finally, I started walking down quietly. When I was about halfway down the stairs, the loud sound of my back door slamming shut exploded through the silence of the house. I jumped and froze. I was terrified to move. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely think. After a minute passed with no other sound, I forced myself to keep going. Once I reached the bottom, I turned on the lights. There were clear boot prints on the tile floor. They were muddy, like whoever had been there had come from outside. I looked down the hallway toward the back door and saw that it was shut, but even from where I stood, I could tell it wasn't locked. I ran over and locked it immediately, then checked the front door. That one was already locked. I always kept both doors locked, especially the back door since I never used it. What made everything more unsettling was that all the windows were still locked and untouched. So whoever it was must have found some way to get the back door open. I called the police as soon as I could, but to be honest, they were not very helpful. They looked around, but nothing was missing. At least, nothing that I noticed right away. Maybe it had just been some sick prank, but if that was the case, they didn't even stay long enough to enjoy my reaction. So, what was the point? For the next few months, I was constantly on edge. Every little sound in the house made my skin crawl. I checked the doors over and over again, sometimes 4 or 5 times a night. So far, I'm still living in the same house, and nothing else has happened. But just 2 months ago, I woke up and found the back door unlocked again. By then, I had stopped checking the locks every single night, so I told myself maybe I had just forgotten. Still, part of me thinks it was that intruder again, and another part of me wonders if it was something paranormal. I still don't know. But whatever it was trying to do, it still creeps me out to think about it. And I'm planning to move away very soon.